Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl. Today I'm talking about the books I read in March. First, I'm going to talk about the books I read for middle grade March. The group read was The Secret Garden and Moon Garden. I did not read Moon Garden. I did start reading The Secret Garden. I mentioned in my TBR video that I was going to be reading The Secret Garden and a Secret Garden devotional that went along with it with my youngest daughter in homeschool. And so because of that, I have not finished it yet. I thought we might have it done before the end of March, but we're only about 2/3 of the way through it. So we will be bring that over to April. So I didn't finish the group read, but I did read the group read during the month. For the other prompts, there was read a book by an author with 3 names. Now, one thing you'll notice if you did watch my TBR for middle grade March is that I changed up most of the books that I ended up reading for the prompts. And this is one example of it. For this prompt, I ended up reading The Curious Vanishing of Beatrice Willoughby. This is by G.Z. Schmidt. So I'm taking the G and the Z and the Schmidt to mean those 3 different names. This was a book I was planning on reading. I just didn't know I was going to use it for one of the prompts. And I really didn't know much about this book going into it. I assumed, based on what was on the back, that there would be a child that was missing. However, I thought for some reason that this little kid on the cover would be Beatrice Willoughby, the one that it's talking about vanishing, but it's not. This is a young boy, actually, and a totally different character. On the back, it said, fans of The Westing Game and Clue will savor every plot twist and turn in this witty tale of murder mystery party that's deadly serious. And it lived up to that blurb completely. Throughout the whole book, I kept thinking of The Westing Game and Clue, the movie Clue. So it was just really fun. It was a really fun middle grade. The basic premise is that there's this family that has this party every single year. And at one of the parties, a young girl from town goes missing. One of the members of this family goes to prison for it. So they haven't had the party for many years now. And a week before All Hallows Eve, the little town of Nevermore, an unexpected party invitation is issued to an eccentric group of townspeople. Among them is an heiress, a spy, and an alchemist. There is also a thief, an imposter, and a hypnotist. There is a child, too, perhaps like you, who keeps his eyes and ears wide open at all times. Each of them has a story, each of them knows a secret, but which of them is responsible for the curious vanishing of Beatrice Willoughby? It's basically a setup to find out who was responsible for her disappearance all those years ago. Like I said, it did feel like The Westing Game and Clue mixed together, but also with a really heavy dose of fairy tale, of the classic Grimm's fairy tales. I feel like the fact that it takes place on All Hallows Eve, this would be a really fun read around Halloween. I really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed the writing. I felt like all around it was one of the better middle grade in this kind of genre of middle grade that I've read in a really long time. And there also was, I don't want to give away a spoiler, but there was something in it that I felt like was completely brilliant about who did it. So if you have read it and you want to message me on Instagram or something, you can let me know if you know what I'm talking about. Or if you read it after this and you want to ask me what I meant, I will tell you on there. I just don't want to spoil it for everybody. I had so much fun reading it, and I will definitely pick up more books by this author if they're like this one. And then for prompt number 2, it was a book with flowers on the cover. This was a book I didn't even know I was going to read for middle grade March until I picked it up, and then I ended up using it for the flowers on the cover. It was Wish. This is by Barbara O'Connor, and there's little flowers all over on the ground. I heard Whitney at Whitney's Reading Journey talk about this book, and then that day I actually went out to Little Free Libraries, so you might have seen that short video. Because this was fresh in my mind, I grabbed that from the Little Free Library, and then once I read it, I decided to use it for the flowers on the cover because I enjoyed it so much. Before that day, I didn't even know that this book existed, and this actually ended up being my favorite book of the month. There were a few that came very close to it, but it was the one that I think I felt like I had to choose for that. So I'll read the back. It says, Charlie Reese has been making the same secret wish every day since 4th grade. But when she is sent to live with family she barely knows, it seems unlikely that her wish will ever come true. That is, until she meets Wishbone, a skinny stray dog who captures her heart, and Howard, a neighbor boy who proves surprising in a lot of ways. Suddenly, Charlie is in serious danger of discovering that what she thought she wanted may not be all what she needs. It is such a good story of found family. Howard is such a good friend. He's such a good kid. I loved that little kid. It was just very heartwarming, so I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend that one as well. Number 3 was a book that is part of a series. I did use the book that I planned on using for this prompt. I don't have it with me right now because my oldest daughter has stolen it, but it is the 6th book in the City Spies series. It's called London Calling. I started off March with this book. It was the first one I read. It was really fast moving. It was full of action. There were a couple of characters that were added into this one, and I really enjoyed those new characters. So I have heard that it may be the last book, and that's what I thought going into it. But actually, with how it ended, I don't think it is. I'm not 100% sure about that. So I hope it's not. I hope that there is at least one more, just because there is something I'm hoping will happen that didn't. But it was really good, just like all the other City Spies books. I recommend them. I think they're a lot of fun. And then number 4 is a book that involves travel. I believe I kept this one the same as well. For this one, I used Iceberg by Jennifer A. Nielsen. And this book is about the Titanic. It is a young girl who stows away onto the Titanic. She wants to be a reporter, so she starts asking a lot of questions. And so the whole book is, there's kind of a little mystery she's trying to solve. It is her trying to not get kicked off the boat and her trying to get answers to these questions so that she can write a newspaper article that will be different than everybody else's about the Titanic. Unfortunately, this did not live up to my expectations, which is surprising. Jennifer Nielsen books usually live up to my expectations. There has only been one other one I've been disappointed in so far, and that was the one from last year. I'm blanking on the name right now. But that one, it didn't live up to my expectations, not because it wasn't a good book. It was actually really good. But it was because I found out that at the end that it was about a real person. And so some of the things in it were real and some weren't. And I don't feel like she went into enough detail about what was real and what wasn't. And so my favorite part of the whole book, I'm pretty sure was not real, but I didn't know. And so it messed with my feelings after the book. So I already decided that with that one, in the future, I'm just going to pretend like it's completely fiction, and then then I'll be able to reread it again and enjoy it. I know that sounds weird, but I am weird about books. I am weird about books like that. That's one of the things I love about the Timeless series. She is so good about saying where she gets her inspiration and then telling the true story or pointing you to the true story of the parts in it that are real but were somebody else or something, or things that were changed. So I wish that she had done that better in that book. This one did not live up to my expectations for a completely different reason. It wasn't terrible. I think that most kids would like it. I think that it would help kids to learn some things about the Titanic, maybe enough that they would be interested in reading more about it or finding out more about it. But it really just fell flat for me. What it felt like to me is that she wanted to teach kids about the Titanic, but where she has been able to in the past with her historical fiction teach about the wars and the Berlin Wall and all these different things that her books are about through the story, this felt like it was still doing that. However, it felt like the character knew too much or was asking questions that were trying to get the information of why things would happen later, so that when they happened, she didn't have to explain it then. Kids would already know from the information beforehand, if that makes sense. It felt very unrealistic, that the kind of questions she was asking before they became a problem. I don't know. It felt very unrealistic to me. And maybe a lot of the target audience that wouldn't register with them or they wouldn't care. One thing, for example, is that there's a part in the book where she's talking about refraction. And in the middle of the book, at the end of the chapter, there is this picture showing refraction in the example that the person is using. And that would fit in some books, but that felt really out of place in this book. I felt like that was something that should have been in the author's note at the end. Hey, remember that conversation about refraction? Here's a picture of it or something. But maybe it makes more sense to have it there so that kids can see it immediately when they're having the conversation. I don't know. I'm not an expert about this stuff. It wasn't terrible. It just fell a little flat. It started out really well, but I just felt like about halfway through the story, I just really had lost interest in the main character. And in historical fiction, I think that you really have to be tuned into that main character. So this one wasn't terrible. I wouldn't not recommend it, but I wouldn't recommend it as highly as her other books. And then for number 5, a book that was written in the 1900s. I was going to be using Swallows and Amazons for that, but I did not end up getting to that book. So I took a book I was planning on using for a different prompt and used it for this one instead, and that was Anne of the Island by Lucy Maud Montgomery. I actually wasn't sure if I was going to get to this one in March either, but my mom and I went on our reading retreat and I was able to finish it there. This was a reread. Of course, I've talked about before. I've read the Anne of Green Gables series, the whole series, many times, and every time I love it. This one is not one of my favorites in the series, but there's still so many moments in it that I absolutely love. If you've watched the 1980s adaptation that Kevin Sullivan made, which is the one I always recommend, I do not recommend the Netflix TV show. I always recommend the old 1980s version. When you watch that and you watch the Anne of Green Gables part and the Anne of Avonlea part, most people assume that the first part of the miniseries is going to be just the Anne of Green Gables book and the second part is going to be the Anne of Avonlea book. But actually the second part covers Anne of Avonlea, Anne of the Island. If I'm remembering correctly, there's also parts from Anne of Windy Poplars in it as well. They're just before the time when they actually took place. As you're reading Anne of Avonlea and Anne of the Island and Anne of Windy Poplars, you'll notice that a lot of the story is changed. They take town names or situations and they mix them together, and they do change a lot of it, but they keep the heart of it, which is why it doesn't bother me so much. But what you do find is that while there are a lot of these books that are left out of that adaptation, there are a lot of parts that are taken word for word out of the books. Conversations, just like with the first part and with Anne of Green Gables, there are conversations, dialogue that is word for word. And I love that because then as you're reading it, you can see it. So you really feel like you're getting the story when you watch the adaptation. But then when you're rereading the books after having watched it, you can see the characters, you remember those lines. So it's really fun. They did such a good job with that adaptation. One part that I really loved in this book was when somebody would say something was the beginning of the end. And they said it was not the beginning of the end, it was just the end of the beginning. And I felt like that was such a simple sentence, but also very profound. I also really loved the conversation that Anne and Ruby Gillis have about heaven. I felt like that was a really touching part of the book. I've already mentioned in another video, in the epistolary tag, actually, that one of my favorite literary letters is from this book, and it's when Anne goes to her birth home and is given some things that belong to her parents, and in one of them, there's a letter from her mom that's talking about her as a baby. So of course, I love that part. And then of course, you've got the iconic ending with Anne and Gilbert. Obviously, everyone knows I will always recommend every Anne book, the whole Anne series. I love them. That was all of the prompts for middle grade March, but I did read quite a few more middle grade books and some nonfiction. Another book that I was really looking forward to was one that I had planned on reading in October, but I mentioned on the video that it got here late. So I saved it for middle grade March, and that was Shadow Hall Academy, The Whispering Walls by Phil Hicks. That is another one that did not live up to my expectations of it. I expected it to be a really atmospheric, spooky tale like his other book, The Haunting of Aveline Jones, or for it to be more of a Scooby-Doo type mystery where there's something going on. It might be a haunting, but then it turns out to be somebody pretending to do something. But it wasn't either one of those things. It was nowhere near as good as Aveline Jones, in my opinion. And I just really never felt connected to the story or to the characters. So again, this is one that could be totally a matter of opinion. There could be other people that would just really love it, but I felt like it wasn't as good. And I guess in that theme, there was also The Innocent Rebel that I was really looking forward to by J.E. Ribby. And this one was the one that I mentioned, said it was Anne of Green Gables meets Little House on the Prairie in the Revolutionary War. This was not a bad book, but I did not get vibes for Anne of Green Gables or Little House on the Prairie from this. So I'm not sure why they used that blurb. I think it actually would have been better. I think I would have enjoyed it more had I not had that in my head. So if you bought this after my recommendation, or if you want to read it after I talk about it, go into it knowing it really is not Anne of Green Gables meets Little House on the Prairie. It does take place during the Revolutionary War. There are things in it that I think kids will learn about the Revolutionary War because of this book. It was really back and forth for me. There were parts of it that I absolutely loved and I was really engaged. And then there were other parts that took me out of the story and I kind of started not being as interested. It wouldn't be for more sensitive readers that love animals because there is a lot of hunting in this book. The J and the E are not one person. J is, I think, the husband, and E, I think, is the wife. but they wrote it together. And I believe he is a hunter, survivalist, all of those kind of things. And there is a lot of trapping of animals in this, and were a couple of parts that were a little gruesome, at least to me. So to other people, they might not bat an eye at it. If your kid was really into those things, they wouldn't matter. But if you have a really sensitive kid who doesn't want to read about animals being trapped and hunted and killed, then they might not want to pick this one up. It starts at the Battle of Lexington, and their father is taken by the British. So the kids are supposed to stay with a neighbor, but they end up leaving to try to go find their dad. But they never quite make it there. They end up somewhere else and become involved in the war in a different way. Again, this is one that I liked, I didn't love, and there were some things I didn't enjoy about it at all. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue with the series yet or not. I've talked a lot about this series of Heroes of History books, and we read Milton Hershey, More Than Chocolate, in our homeschool. We've read quite a few of the books in this series in our homeschool over the years, and we've liked all of them. This one was all about Milton Hershey's life, where he started from, how he turned Hershey Company into what it is. When my oldest daughter was 3 was the last time we visited Hershey, Pennsylvania, and we went on a trolley ride. We learned a lot about him and the school that he started there, and about him starting that town. And yet there were still things that either I had forgotten or never learned in this book. And I really enjoyed reading it with my younger daughter. It was really well written. It was a really good story. I just love so much about Milton Hershey. We're going to visit there again this year, and so I'm really excited to go back and see it again after reading this with her. So like always, I recommend any of their biographies. I also read Another Gospel by Alisa Childers, and this is a look at progressive Christianity and how it is affecting people. And so she gave her story of the church that she used to go to, where the pastor was becoming more progressive, and invited her into a small group, and they started bouncing around ideas, and she felt really uncomfortable. So she went out on her own to learn more and just studied everything she could to learn all that she could. It was really good. I wouldn't say it was my favorite book I've ever read about that kind of subject, but it was really good. I like her writing, and I like her. If you were dealing with something like that or knew somebody who was, I think it would be a helpful book. One book that was a huge surprise to me because of how much I liked it is this one, The Restorationist Beneath the Swirling Sky by Carolyn Liloglau, and I'm sure that's not how to pronounce it. In this book, this kid is dropped off at a relative's house, he and his younger sister. His cousin is there. They're going to stay there because their parents are going on a vacation. And the mom is hoping that he will gain more of an appreciation for art while he's there, because he has been an artist in his life, and he has let something discourage him from doing the thing he loves. But then you can tell right away that there's some kind of mystery there that the mom does not want him to know about. And she's making sure, when she sees the cousin there, she makes sure with the adult that I think is a great uncle, that he is not going to be involving the son or the younger daughter in whatever that is. And pretty soon you find out what it is. It's the story of the whole book. His little sister disappears into a painting. So the thing that they do is, in this family, they can travel through paintings. And so he and the cousin have to go into the paintings to try to find the sister. And there is a whole story involved in that I will not spoil, but you learn so much about art. It was such a creative and unique book. I wasn't completely sold at first because Vincent, the main character, all the characters are named after artists. And I wasn't sold because he was kind of mean. The way he thought about Georgia, the cousin, he would think mean things about her and about her appearance. And so I felt like he was a bully. He does have a lot of growth, especially one moment is very touching. So by the time it was over, I was okay with it having started that way. I just think that if you were having a kid read it or you're reading it with your kid, you don't want to stop there where he's mean. You want to see that redemption. There was one plot point that he didn't tell anyone about at the end, any of the adults or anyone else, and I really wished he would. So I'm hoping that in the next book that will be something that comes out right away. That was my only problem with it, but I'm assuming she did that for a reason. I will definitely be reading the rest of the series. There was faith content in it. It wasn't a, pound you over the head with it kind of a faith content, but there was some in it. While I was reading it, I decided that this would be something very fun to bring into our homeschool. So next year, I am going to get the rest of the series, and we're going to do art study the whole year using a book I bought recently that's a nonfiction, which I'll share later, and then these books, and then we can be looking at the paintings as we're reading about them in the book. I think that would be really fun, and I think my daughter would like it. Using, these younger books, I think it will be fine for her in high school because I enjoyed it so much as an adult, but also will be using an older adult nonfiction along with it. So I think it would be a really fun way to incorporate all of that. And she is an artist, so I think it would be a really fun way to do more art study in a way that's different than what we've done in the past. I think that you could do that with younger kids as well, reading this with them and maybe having prints of the art that is talked about in here as you're reading the book, or look it up as you're going along. But there is, in the end, there is a list of all of the paintings and artists referenced in this. So you wouldn't have to have read it before to know what to have prepared. Highly recommend this. This was also in the running for my favorite book of the month. And then I read an autobiography, Dinner with Vampires, Life on a Cult TV Show While Also in a Cult by Bethany Joy Lenz. If you watched One Tree Hill back in the day, she was one of the main characters on that show. So this was the story of her childhood, how she got into acting, and then how she got the role on One Tree Hill, and then also how she got into a cult. There wasn't very much language in the first part of the book, but at the very end there was. It amped up a bit and there was all of a sudden a lot of language, which surprised me a little just because it hadn't been that way the whole book. But it wasn't necessarily her using the language in her writing. It was quotes, and then even quotes of herself using the language. And there were some things that I wish there was more information about, especially at the end. Basically, the cult that she was a part of, it started out really innocently. And it was a group meeting for Bible study. And then someone else came in and made it more intense. And eventually, a lot of the people are living in one house or really close to each other. And they are all involved in each other's finances and lives and decisions, and it's a lot of emotional manipulation. And there was even one part where she talked about, I'll read the quote. She said, "Made me feel insecure, worried my cult wasn't culty enough. After all, there was no branding, no strange rituals with psychedelics, no polyamory." I really related to that because when I say that the Mormon Church is a cult, most people will immediately say, no, it's not. Because when we think of cult, we think of the places where people physically can't leave, or where there is a lot of ritual abuse. And so when she said polyamory, that did kind of make me laugh because Joseph Smith practiced polyamory along with polygamy. So there has been polyamory in the Mormon Church, but it's not something that, would be considered normal or accepted today. On the surface, the Mormon Church doesn't seem like a cult. But when you really get into the nuts and bolts, and if you watch my video I made using the Bite model, you will see that it definitely can be considered a cult. And so I really related to how she got into this cult and then how she felt in it and how it seemed like she was just living a normal life, but there were so many things that she had to still do and things that were affected by it. There was one really heartbreaking part of a role that she gave up because the leader didn't think she should take it. And then at the end, when she left it, how it's the same thing. Her life wasn't in danger leaving necessarily, but it still was so hard and it still affected so many things and relationships. And so I really related to that. And then right after that, she said, "There is one indisputable way to identify a cult, one characteristic that they all share." So this is the ones that don't seem like a cult and the ones that are obvious. "It is the notion that anyone who does not agree with the group's beliefs or choices, who expresses concerns, who simply dares to ask questions, is deemed unsafe." And I think that that is the most important line of the whole book. Then she said, "For mind control to work, there has to be heroes and villains. It has to be us versus them." That, I think, is something so important. I wouldn't recommend this book to everybody, again, because of the language that does pop up at the end of the book. But it really does have a really poignant part where she pretty much is losing faith in everything afterward. But then she has this really, really powerful moment that keeps her from throwing it away completely. If you are a fan of hers, or of that show, it's probably something that you would be interested in. Or if you just enjoy reading books about cults, I've always enjoyed reading books about cults, even when I didn't realize I was in one. I felt like one of the most creative things about the book was that she had that theme of Dinner with Vampires, and every character, every person in her book had a fake name. So she changed the names to protect people, and every single one of them was a vampire name from some kind of a vampire book like Dracula or something else that was well known. So that was pretty interesting. I thought that was a very creative way to do it. I'm not even the hugest fan in the world. The only thing I've seen her in is a couple of Hallmark Christmas movies that I did like, and then the One Tree Hill, which I did like, but I wasn't a huge fan of it. So I still was able to enjoy it, even just knowing who she was, but not being a huge fan. For my literature course, I was going to read Moby Dick, but based on some recommendations from other people, I decided that instead of reading the full Moby Dick, I would read this graphic novel. So this is by Herman Melville, of course, but this is retold by Sophie First. And this was a really quick read. It wasn't very long, but it did have the story, the gist of it. And I've been told by a few people that particular edition does really have everything you need to know unless you want to read everything in Moby Dick. And based on the graphic novel, I don't want to read everything in Moby Dick. I am just glad to have read that, to kind of know more of the story than I knew before without having to read the whole thing. Then I read the next installment in the Framed series by James Ponti. He's the same guy who writes the City Spies book. This one's called Trapped. And in this series, the City Spies can also be kind of unrealistic if you think about it too hard, of a bunch of kids that are working for the intelligence of England. But in this one, for some reason, this series, I feel like is even more unrealistic. But he's working with the FBI and the CIA, but they're still fun. They're still so enjoyable. So all you have to do is just pretend like it's realistic, that little kids would be involved in these organizations, that they would use them on missions, and then you can have a really good time with it. So there's not a ton to say about that one without spoiling the ones before it, but I really enjoyed it. It was just as good as the first two. For my mom and I's group, the Inklings group, or our book club, I read The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain. I've seen adaptations of this and read like a classic starts version with my kids, but this was the first time I read the full novel. I really enjoyed it. There were times when I felt like the writing style, the language was a little bit difficult, not necessarily to understand, but just to stay engaged in. But I still really liked it. I liked the whole overarching story. I think it's interesting to read something that I know has been adapted and pulled from by so many people. So I really enjoyed that. And my mom and I will be getting together soon to talk about it. So I'm sure I'll have even more appreciation for it after we discuss it. That usually happens. I also read the short little book Power Through Prayer by E.M. Bounds with Tiffany and Dia and Anne and Kelly were doing on YouTube. They were talking about that. And so I was able to just print off the PDF that Tiffany shared, and I read through that and watched their videos. I did really enjoy it. I didn't feel like it was as applicable to me. It was kind of like the Vadi Bakum book I read in February, where I felt like it was definitely geared more towards pastors. And I feel like I gained more from that from watching their videos. I read through a book called Spooky Lakes that Christy at Dostoevsky in Space recommended. And it just talks about lakes all over the world and different unusual and interesting things about them. So that was less of a book, more of a reference, I think. But I enjoyed looking through that and finding out more about some of the different lakes. And then I read The Tales of Newell and Doran, The Gorgon's Fury by Brandon Mull. This just barely came out, and this is in the Fablehaven world. Newell and Doran are two characters in Fablehaven, and so I was pretty excited to read that. However, I did not enjoy that as much. It wasn't bad, but I've really enjoyed the Fablehaven and Dragon Watch, the sequel series, those books. And so I expected to really enjoy this one too. I probably should have known that I wouldn't as much because they are not my favorite characters. Like, I like them, but I don't love them as much as some of the other side characters. So that probably should have told me that I might not enjoy a whole book about them. But it did feel kind of silly and immature quite a few times in the book. There were a couple parts that I didn't like at all. There was one kind of afterlife type moment that felt like it was kind of a ripoff of a scene from a Harry Potter book. I won't mention which one, but it felt like it was a little bit like that, but not done as well. And then there were a few other things throughout that I just felt like were kind of weird. So it's a hard one. I wouldn't not recommend it, but I wouldn't recommend it either. If you've liked the Fablehaven and Dragon Watch books, and especially if you're a kid and you love those books, you love those characters, then you probably would love it. But if you like the Fablehaven and Dragon Watch, but you don't absolutely love them, I wouldn't bother. And if you're like me and you really enjoyed them, but not your favorite characters, I don't know that I would recommend it. So, a little bit of a disappointment, but it was still okay. I had higher expectations. The one last book that ended up being a disappointment to me was The Bletchley Riddle. This is Ruta Sepetys and Steve Sheinkin. And again, this is not because it was a bad book. So I feel like a lot of the disappointments this month weren't because they weren't good books. They were just books that didn't live up to the hype in my mind. And with that one, again, it kind of was that the thing I've talked about on here where I feel like there is a trend right now for first person present tense. And it, in some stories, I don't even hardly notice it. And in other stories, I notice it, but the story makes me not care. And then other times it takes me out of the story repeatedly. This one took me out of the story repeatedly when it showed up. I ended up partway through it just kind of skimming to the end. I'm not fully counting it as a book read, but I don't fully count it as a DNF either because I read a good portion of it and then read the end. But I just felt like it didn't live up to the promise I had in my head for what the book was going to be. It takes place at Bletchley Park during World War II with the code breaking. And if you don't know anything about that story, especially if you're younger, I feel like it would be a good introduction to it. It's just that I've seen that story done better before. So that was really my only beef with it. I didn't hate it. I don't think it's bad. I think that maybe I'll revisit it later and enjoy it more. But I read a couple of books in a row that were disappointing, and then that one too. And so it felt like, okay, I just want to read something that I'm going to love. And so I put that down and read Anne. The last book I finished in March. There were two that I did together. One was a nonfiction I was reading, and one was part nonfiction, part fiction that I was listening to. The nonfiction I was reading was Unmask Alice by Rick Emerson. And this tells the story of Beatrice Sparks and her writing of some very popular books in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Go Ask Alice and Jay's Journal. This is something I've been wanting to read for a while based on an experience I had with Jay's Journal. And while reading it, I decided I wanted to read Jay's Journal again because I haven't read it since I was 13. And it was so fresh in my mind still after all those years because it impacted me so much in not a great way. So I listened to it. I'm going to be filming a full review of both books and the person, why he wrote this about her. So stay tuned for that, and you'll get my review on those two books. Then I'll just say this one was really good and Jay's Journal is not. There'll be more information on that coming soon. And then real quick, I'm just going to talk about what I'm planning on reading in April because I don't feel like making a whole video for it this month. Because in April, I'm planning on just doing books for some of the year challenges and then mood reading. And so I'm just going to go through that really quick. For my Agatha Christie reading that I'm doing this year, I really wanted to get to the next book in April. So this month, I'm planning on reading The Mystery of the Blue Train in April. And then for the Year of Maud, for April, it is Anne of Windy Poplars. My copy is Anne of Windy Willows. I just got that whole series for my birthday, and I let myself open it early so that each month I could be using my new editions, but this is the pretty one for Anne of Windy Willows. It has the original title. For the Reading the Classics 2025 from Anne at In Search of Wonder, the April prompt is a memoir. This might be cheating. I don't know. I was having a hard time figuring out what to do for this because I didn't have any memoirs on my TBR shelf that are a classic. But then I was thinking about how I really want to get to An Experiment in Criticism by C.S. Lewis. The Literary Life podcast has a whole section on this book, and they just reposted some of those episodes, and they're ones I really wanted to get to. And I've been wanting to read this and listen to those podcast episodes. And I thought, okay, this is old enough that it counts as a classic. And in it, C.S. Lewis is talking about how we read literature and how we judge it. Based on his other books, I'm assuming that there will be things in here about his life, or, it's his opinions. And so it's not exactly a memoir, but it is written about him from his point of view. So I'm going to count that. And then hopefully I'll be reading books that will count toward the Princess Bride Challenge. For the Read Your Bookshelf Challenge from Chantel, the April is Flowers, and for that I want to read Elizabeth and Her German Garden by Elizabeth von Arnim. Haley is also doing a read-along of Enchanted April by this author in April, and I have really enjoyed this book, and so I'm going to try to read that as well along with it. But because of that, I've always wanted to read this one as well. So this one is very short, and it's about gardens and it's covered in flowers. So I figured that would be the perfect one for this prompt. And then for Jane Reads Christian Fiction Challenge, it is a new to you author. I don't have it here with me, but Beyond Ivy Walls by Rachel Fordham. That one I just got for my birthday as well. So I'm planning on using that for that prompt. And then other than that, I just have a few books I've really wanted to get to. One of them is for my mom and I's group. It's actually not supposed to be our book until May, but I wanted to read it early because I wanted to read it as soon as it came out. It's Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, the new book in the Hunger Games, and I take the dust jackets off when I read, so that's why, because I'm in the middle of this right now. And then I got Tom Felton's autobiography, Beyond the Wand, and I have The Magic and Mayhem of Growing Up as a Wizard. I've heard good things about this. I met him a few years ago. He was very nice, and so I've been looking forward to reading this. Then I also finally got the third installment in the Treasures of the Earth series by Kimberly Woodhouse, Hope Unburied. And this is another book that takes place in the paleontology world. And I've talked on here before in the book one I liked but didn't love, but second book I loved. So I'm hoping that this one I'll really enjoy. I also got this book, The Wrong Way Home by Kate O'Shaughnessy. And as far as I know, this is a book about a little girl in a cult. So I've heard good things about it. So I've been very interested in reading this. I wanted to read that in middle grade March, but I didn't get it in time. With my youngest daughter, we're going to be going through Cold Case Christianity by J. Warner Wallace in our homeschool. This will probably be something that will take a few months, but we're going to start this as soon as we're done with spring break. I am hoping to finally get started on The Unexpected Mrs. Polyfax by Dorothy Gilman. I've heard about this series so much now, and I am anxious to hear about this little old lady who gets herself involved, I think, with the CIA. Then also another one I've been putting off that I want to read is Drake Hall. This is by Christina Bear. This is the next one in the Secrets of Ormdale. And I really loved the first book, so I want to get to the second one of that finally. And then number 4 in Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower. I love this series so far, so I'm for sure going to be reading book 4. I am so tempted to just keep going and read the whole series, but there's a couple of different read-alongs by different people, and they're all doing the same thing, which is 1 book a month, all the way through the 8 books, and then hopefully the next ones will come out. And so I'm trying to stick to that so that I enjoy them and make them last a little bit longer, but it's really tempting to just drop everything else and read the rest of those. But I'm going to try to only read number 4 in April. And then I just started Uniquely You by Sally and Nathan Clarkson. This is kind of a follow-up to the book they wrote together, Different. That was really good. So hopefully this one will be as good as that. Then the last 2 that I just started, today is April 2nd. So I just started these this week. How the Book of Mormon Came to Pass by Lars Nielsen. This is just one guy I saw on a show talking about a theory he has come up with for how Joseph Smith came up with the Book of Mormon. I've heard some people criticize this and his theories, and then I've heard that he has defenses about it. So I am planning on reading it, watching the critiques of it, and then watching his defenses and seeing what I think. So far, he has some really interesting things in it. I'm not sold on his idea yet, but we'll see. And then for my literature course, the next book I'm reading is A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. So far, I've really enjoyed this as well. I'm only a few chapters in. And then also continuing with The Secret Garden and devotional with my daughter once we're back from spring break as well. So that is a lot. I don't know if I'll get to all of those or through all of those, although a lot of those books are pretty short besides the nonfiction ones. So I'm hoping that this will be a really good group of books to choose from, and then I'll be able to get through a good percentage of them. Like I said, I decided that Wish was my favorite read of March, but that really was closely followed by Beatrice Willoughby and Beneath the Swirling Sky. And then, of course, The Unmasked Alice. While it wasn't the most enjoyable read, it was so interesting. So those ones are probably the ones that stuck out to me the most. I would say that The Unmasked Alice does have language, but I'll talk about that more in my review video. So I would love to hear what you're looking forward to the most in April, what you enjoyed the most in March.